My son and his wife flew out on a trip, leaving me all alone to care for her mother. Everyone thought the poor woman was bedridden, practically in a coma after a horrific car wreck. But the second they closed that front door behind them, she snapped her eyes open and whispered something that sent a bone-chilling shiver straight down my spine. "I'm so glad you're here. Please, listen to my story until the very end, and be sure to drop a comment letting me know which city you're reading this from. I really want to see how far this story travels across the map. I'm 64 years old, and I never in a million years thought I'd reach this age, only to realize how little I actually knew my own son. Kamisi had always been a bit distant, even as a little boy. He wasn't the type of child to come running for a hug or to sit in your lap and chatter away about his day. For the longest time, I tried to convince myself that it was just his personality, that some children are just less affectionate than others. Life hits everyone differently, and he had his own path. I clung to that comfort, especially after he married Yejide 3 years ago. Yejide is stunning, well-groomed, articulate, and always dressed in impeccable designer labels. At the time, I thought to myself, fine, maybe he didn't stay close to his mother, but at least he's settled down with a good woman. He's doing well for himself, and for that, I'm grateful. Last Tuesday, Kamisi called me early in the morning. "Mama," he said in that flat, even tone of his, a voice that hadn't carried a drop of warmth or joy for me in years. "Yejide and I have to fly to Chicago immediately. Her mother is having another crisis, and we can't leave her alone." I knew exactly who he was talking about. Thandiwe Okiki, Yejide's mother. For 6 months, she had been lying almost motionless after a terrible accident on Interstate 85 that left her with a severe traumatic brain injury. The doctors had described her state as being close to a persistent vegetative state. In their sprawling estate in Alpharetta, just outside of Atlanta, they had turned the guest suite into a hospital room. It was filled with a medical bed, oxygen tanks, and heart monitors. The poor woman lay there day and night, hooked up to wires and tubes, seemingly unresponsive to the world around her. "Of course, son," I heard myself say, though something deep inside me felt a strange tightening. "How long will you be gone?" 4 days, maybe 5 at the most," he replied after a brief pause. "The home health nurse, Nia, will come by at 9 in the morning and 6 in the evening to check her vitals and her IV. You just need to be in the house in case of an emergency." I should have asked more questions. I should have asked why. If Thandiwe needed constant care, they didn't just hire a live-in nurse. Why couldn't they arrange for 24-hour professional supervision? But I caught myself thinking something else entirely. My son finally needed me for something. He was calling, asking for help, relying on me. For a mother, sometimes that feeling is worth more than any logic. So I pushed all those warning bells to the back of my mind. Thursday morning, I arrived at their house with a small overnight bag. That house in the gated community always felt cold to me, despite the expensive mahogany furniture and the perfectly curated decor. Everything was too polished, too sterile, like a photo in a luxury magazine where nobody actually lives. Yejide opened the door, offering one of her practiced, polite smiles. It was just enough to be civil, but her eyes remained as empty as a vacant lot. "Adero, thank you so much for coming," she said, stepping aside. "You're really saving us here." "Oh, don't worry about it," I replied. "We're family. Family looks out for one another." "Mama's been peaceful lately," Yejide continued. "The doctors say she's stable, but we just can't risk leaving her alone. It's too scary." Kamisi appeared in the hallway, already wearing his silk tie, suitcase in hand. He kept glancing at his gold watch and his phone. "Our flight leaves in 3 hours, he said curtly. "Nurse Naya will be here at 9 in the morning and 6 tonight. All the medications are labeled and sitting on the dedicated shelf in the kitchen." I followed them into the guest suite. There, in the center of the room, stood the hospital bed. Around it were machines, a softly beeping monitor, and an IV stand. Thandiwe lay there, almost perfectly still. Her hands were folded over the quilt, her face pale. Her silver hair was neatly combed, no braids, just soft waves against the pillow. She even had a light touch of pale pink lipstick on her lips. If I hadn't known the tragedy of her wreck, I would have thought she was just taking a deep nap. "She hasn't regained consciousness in months," Yejide whispered, standing at the head of the bed. "Sometimes I talk to her, hoping she can hear something, but the specialists say there's likely no cognitive function left." The way she said those words made my skin crawl. Her voice was soft and caring, but her gaze was cold and calculating, as if she wasn't looking at her mother, but at a piece of furniture. Kamisi gave me a quick, formal peck on the cheek. "We'll call tonight to check in. All the emergency numbers are on the fridge," he threw over his shoulder. Within a minute, their expensive luggage was rolling across the marble floor toward the door. The lock clicked. The sound was quiet, but for some reason, it felt incredibly final. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the house settle into silence without its masters. The quiet was heavy and thick, broken only by the rhythmic beep-beep from Thandiwee's room. I went back into the room and adjusted the blanket that had shifted when we were leaning over the bed. I ran my palm across her cool forehead, smoothing back her gray hair. And that's when it happened. The very moment my fingers touched her skin, Thandiwee's eyes snapped open. It was sudden, like someone surfacing from deep underwater. I gasped and stumbled back against the edge of the rug. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. Her dark eyes were looking at me with total clarity and purpose. There was no coma in that look, none at all. "Thank God," she whispered. Her lips trembled, and her voice was raspy, but very much alive. "I thought they would never leave." She took a breath, blinked, and added a little louder, "I am so glad it was you, Adero." The blood drained from my face. "Thandiwe? You're awake?" I stammered, my hands shaking. She tried to prop herself up, wincing in pain. "Help me, please. I've been lying still for so long. My legs and back feel like they belong to a stranger. Everything aches." I rushed to adjust her pillows and carefully raised the back of the medical bed. My fingers wouldn't cooperate, and my thoughts were a tangled mess. But the doctors," I muttered, barely able to catch my breath. "Kamisi, Yejide, they all said you were in a coma. They said you didn't understand anything." Thandiwe let out a small, bitter laugh. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was filled with resentment and exhaustion. "Oh, Adero," she said, looking me straight in the eye. "There is so much you don't know." She gripped my hand, and her strength was surprising for someone who had supposedly been a vegetable for 6 months. "They think I'm in a coma because it's convenient for them. They need everyone to believe I'm not here, that I'm just a shell." "I don't understand," I whispered, sinking into the chair beside the bed. My knees felt like jelly. "They are drugging me," she said calmly, almost clinically. "Every day, sometimes twice a day. Yejide gives me injections that knock me out completely. I can't move, I can't open my eyes. She tells everyone it's what the neurologist ordered to keep me from getting agitated, but those aren't the right medications." My head began to spin. The room felt like it was tilting. "That can't be true," I choked out. "Why? Why would they do that?" Thandiwe looked at me with a long, heavy gaze. "Because they are stealing everything I have," she answered quietly. "And they need me out of the way, so I can't stop them." "What do you mean, stealing?" I asked, my throat going dry. "My bank accounts, my savings, my retirement investments, my historic home in Savannah," she listed, never breaking eye contact. "They forged my signature. They're filing power of attorney papers, acting as if I gave them the right to manage my estate while I'm unconscious." She took a heavy breath. "They've already transferred over $250,000 from my accounts." The number hit me like a physical blow. "250,000? I repeated. "But Kamisi, he's my son. He wouldn't do that." "Your son," Thandiwe said firmly but gently, "is not the man you've painted him to be in your heart." For a second, her gaze softened. "And Yejide? She has no brakes. She is a monster, Adero." I felt nauseous. I wanted to stand up, walk out, and scream that she was wrong, but I just gripped the armrests of the chair tighter. "How do you know all this if they keep you drugged?" I managed to ask. "Sometimes I manage to surface," she replied softly. The drugs don't always work the same way. Sometimes the dose is a little lighter or my body fights back harder. I can't open my eyes or move a muscle, but I can hear. I hear everything. She squeezed my hand even harder. They are convinced I'm totally tuned out, so they don't hold back. They talk about everything right in front of me. She closed her eyes for a second, remembering. Last week, I heard Yejide on the phone. She was laughing, bragging about how easy it was to fool everyone. She said the hardest part was having to cry convincingly at the hospital. The rest, she said, was a piece of cake. Everything inside me was protesting. This can't be happening, I repeated in a whisper. People don't do things like this. It gets worse, she said, and her voice sent chills down my spine. What do you mean? I asked, terrified of the answer. They don't plan on keeping me like this forever, Thandiwe said calmly. I heard them arguing about the timeline. They were deciding when would be the best time to let me pass away naturally. The words hung between us like a death sentence. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. They want you dead, I finally exhaled. The words felt heavy on my tongue. Thandiwe nodded slowly. Yes, she said. Then she looked at me in a way that made my heart drop. And Adero, I think you might be in danger too. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there by her bed, feeling like I was chained to that chair. My mind was screaming one thing. My own son and his wife weren't just greedy. They were willing to go all the way. And now they had dragged me into the middle of it. What do you mean I might be in danger? I asked, my voice barely a shadow. Thandiwe tried to sit up higher, and I immediately tucked a pillow behind her. My hands were shaking from fear and shock. You are here as their witness, Adero, she said clearly. The kind grandmother who, out of love for her son, is helping care for her daughter-in-law's poor, unconscious mother. She paused. When something finally happens to me, you are the one they want telling the world that I never showed any signs of life. You'll tell the police that everything was peaceful and that they did everything they could to save me. It felt like I'd been hit by a freight train. So, they're using me. Using both of us. We are both just props in their play, she replied. You are the living alibi. I am the body they use to cash the checks. She looked away for a second, and I saw a weariness that went beyond her illness. It was the weariness of years of betrayal. But you, she looked back at me. You still have a chance to leave. You could tell them you feel sick, that you can't stay. You could call a different nurse and go home. You could close your eyes and pretend you never heard a word. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside was a typical upscale neighborhood. Manicured lawns, kids on bikes, a woman pushing a stroller, someone walking a golden retriever. It was such a picture of normal life that it made the horror inside this house even scarier. It was too ordinary for the evil happening in this room. I stood there looking at the fancy facade of their successful life, and I knew, even if I left, I couldn't pretend I didn't know. Tell me everything, I said without turning around, from the very beginning. I went back to the bed and took her hand. She took a deep breath, gathering her strength. The accident was real, Thandiwe began. I really didn't remember anything at first. I was out for a whole week in the hospital. The doctors said I needed rehab, treatment. They said there was a chance I could recover. She gave a twisted smile. And that's when Yejide started caring for me. What did she do? She started convincing the doctors that I was worse than I actually was, Thandiwe explained. She told them I was acting aggressive, that I didn't recognize her, that I was screaming whenever anyone came near me. She actually told them, Mama is scaring the staff. She's a danger to herself and others. But you didn't do that? I asked, still hoping for some shred of a misunderstanding. Not once, she said firmly. Sure, I was confused at first. I'd wake up and not know where I was, but I never hit anyone. I never threw anything. I never screamed. It was all a performance. She was at every doctor's appointment, Tears, stories about her poor mommy who was suffering. She kept pushing the same idea, that it was better to take me home for palliative care so I could spend my final days among family instead of in a cold hospital. And the doctors believed her? Why wouldn't they? She sighed. Before them stood a loving daughter, exhausted and devoted, always there, bringing food, sitting by the bed. Next to her was a son-in-law who supported her, paid for everything, and said all the right things. "Kamisi," I whispered. He knew all this. Thandiwee's face darkened. "He knew," she said harshly. "In fact, he's the one who came up with the financial scheme. Yejide is the hands, the injections, the tears for the doctors, but he is the brain. It was Kamisi who suggested forging the signatures and filing the papers while I was deemed incapacitated." My stomach turned. I remembered his expensive car, the renovations on this house, the stories he told me about his consulting projects. "How long have they been doing this to you?" I asked. "About 3 months," she said. "At first it was just mild sedatives. The doctor prescribed something light for anxiety in small doses. But Yejide kept pushing. She'd tell the doctor I was aggressive, delusional, that I wasn't sleeping. Every time they went in, she'd report that I was getting worse." Thandiwee closed her eyes. Eventually, the doctor started writing scripts for stronger and stronger drugs. And once we were home, Yejide started giving me other injections, not just what was on the prescription. "What do you mean, other things?" She showed the nurse the bottles, she explained. Yes, the ones that were actually prescribed, but she had her own supply. She wasn't getting them from the local CVS, that's for sure. I heard her on the phone discussing shipments. Where would she even get connections for drugs like that? "She used to work at a high-end nursing home in Buckhead," Thandiwee said. 5 years ago she was fired." She laughed without any joy. "Kamisi told everyone it was an unfair termination due to a conflict with management. But later, I found out from a mutual friend that there were questions about missing medications. There was an investigation. They couldn't prove anything, so they just let her go quietly." I gripped the edge of the chair. "So," I said slowly, "she might have done this before." "I'm certain of it," Thandiwee nodded. "And I think that's how they actually met, not at some cute coffee shop like they told everyone. I think they met where her work with vulnerable patients and his hunger for easy money crossed paths." She looked at me intently. "Adero, you remember Kamisi was always getting into trouble in high school, right?" I remembered. I remembered how he got caught selling fake hall passes and forged doctor's notes to other students. I remembered sitting in the principal's office for 2 weeks, making excuses for him, convincing myself it was just a teenage phase and not a character flaw. "I thought he grew out of it," I said quietly. "He didn't grow out of it, Adero," she said calmly. "He just learned how to hide it better." She paused, then added, "And there's something else. This isn't just about the money anymore. They're getting a thrill out of it." "What? I don't understand." "When they think I'm out," Thandiwee explained, "they talk to me. Or rather, they talk over me." She swallowed hard. "Yejide leans down and whispers nasty things in my ear. She tells me how nobody needs me, how nobody will miss me when I finally go. She calls me dead weight and a burden." I clenched my fists. "And Kamisi," she continued, "he talks about what they're going to buy with my money, what countries they'll fly to, what cars they'll get, how good life will be when this is finally over. They've turned my life, my pain, into a source of entertainment and profit." I felt a wave of anger rise up in me, so pure and hot that it scared me. "And that's not all," she said softly. "Last week I heard them talking about a cruise." "A cruise?" "They've already booked a month-long luxury Mediterranean cruise with my money," she said. $12,000 just for that one trip. Kamisi said it would be perfect to wrap everything up before New Year's, so they could go heal their broken hearts on the ocean. I felt sick. "How do you know such specific details?" "Adero," she smiled tiredly. When you think you're standing next to a houseplant, you stop watching what you say. They tell me everything themselves. I swallowed hard. So, what's their plan? Step by step. Thandiwe took a deep breath. Once they get back from this trip to Chicago, she started, Yejide is going to start documenting a decline. She'll start telling the nurse that my breathing is heavy, that my skin looks off, that my heart seems to be acting up. She'll call the doctor, Dr. Vance, and complain that I'm fading. And she'll be the one causing it with higher doses, I realized. Exactly, she nodded. So my actual vitals match her descriptions. I'll have shortness of breath, low blood pressure, all the signs of a body giving up. She was talking about it in a medical tone, as if she were discussing someone else's death. To the world, it will look like the natural conclusion to a traumatic injury. How long do they think this will take? About 10 days, she said. I heard them say 10 days, long enough to look plausible, but fast enough to avoid too many questions. They want me dead before the holidays. I looked at the calendar in my head. Christmas was less than 3 weeks away. And then? I asked. What happens after they get rid of you? Then, she finished for me, Yejide officially inherits. The house in Savannah, the money in the accounts, the insurance payout. They've already researched the laws to make sure there are no hiccups. She gave a tiny smirk. They've even picked out a plot at the cemetery, the cheapest one. Yejide told him on the phone, I don't see the point in wasting money on a dead person. I shuddered. We have to call the police, I breathed. Right now. We have to tell them everything. Thandiwe shook her head. And tell them what? That a bedridden woman suddenly woke up and told a ghost story? That these loving, devoted children are actually killers? Look at the IV. On paper, everything is clean. The signatures look official. My medical records already say I have cognitive issues and aggression. Yejide made sure I was flagged for early onset dementia. How did she do that? By making up symptoms, she said. The doctor saw a tired daughter dealing with her mother's outbursts, and they wrote it down. So, on paper, I'm just a senile old woman who doesn't know what's going on. How much time do we have? I asked, using the word we for the first time. They were planning to start the final stage as soon as they get back from Chicago. These 4 or 5 days were meant to set the scene. Mom is at home, a loving family is here, and even the grandmother is helping out. She looked at me with a gaze that was both desperate and incredibly firm. That's why you're here, Adero. They need the perfect witness. It felt like an electric shock. You mean, they didn't ask you here because they needed help. They asked you here so you would cover for them. Who better to confirm that they fought for my life until the very end than Kamisi's own mother, a kind, simple woman who dropped everything to help. Something inside me finally snapped. All those calls from Kamisi over the last few months. Mama, how are you feeling? Do you need anything? They came back to me in a different light. It wasn't love. It was maintenance. So all this time, I whispered, he wasn't trying to be close to me. He was checking to see how useful you were and how little you suspected. Thandiwe nodded. I'm sorry, Adero, but he manipulated you just like he did everyone else. The last bit of hope I was clinging to finally crumbled. Kamisi didn't need me. He didn't love me. He was just using me as a tool. What are we going to do? I asked, my voice cracking. Thandiwe took my hand again, this time with a strength that was startling. A spark lit up in her eyes. We are going to fight them with their own weapons, she said firmly, and we are going to do it so that they'll be lined up for a prison cell themselves. For the next few hours, she told me things that made my skin crawl. We spoke in whispers, even though we were alone, because it felt like the walls themselves might be listening. I first realized something was wrong about 4 months ago, she began. I was starting to come around. The physical therapy was helping. My memory was clearing up. I was starting to understand where I was. She looked at the window. And that's exactly when Yejide started telling the doctors I was having episodes. She claimed I was scratching her, pushing her, screaming. She even went to the doctor with scratches on her arm. I realize now she must have done that to herself. And the doctors believed her. Of course they did, I said softly. One time she even brought Kamisi to the appointment. He complained about how exhausted she was. He was the one who suggested the doctor consider stronger medications to help calm me down. I closed my eyes. It was all so clear now. Then the financial stuff started. Small amounts at first, $100 here, $200 there, then bigger. How do you know about the money? I heard them, she said. Yejide was telling someone on the phone that they had already moved nearly $400,000 from different accounts, and that house in Savannah, they're selling it using forged documents. They found some loophole regarding incapacitated relatives. I thought of that house, the garden, the porch, the old oak trees. And the nurse? I whispered. Nurse Naya? Didn't she see anything? Nia is a good person, Thandiwe said firmly. She's a real nurse. Her heart is in the right place. But Yejide is smart. She gives me the heaviest injections about an hour before Nia arrives. By the time the nurse gets here, I'm always deep in sleep, looking heavy and ill. And the machines? They're real, but they're not connected to any hospital system. They just show my vitals. It's enough to keep anyone from getting suspicious. I swallowed hard. You said they want you to go naturally. How? 2 weeks ago, she whispered. I heard Yejide reading online about drug combinations that slowly suppress breathing, so it looks like a complication from my condition. She even discussed the dosage and said it would be easiest if it happened at night while everyone was asleep. I broke out in a cold sweat. But we heard it. That has to be enough for us. For us, yes. For a prosecutor, no. She looked at me with that steely gaze again. That's why I need your help, Adero. You are the only person who has seen me awake. We need to gather evidence, real evidence, not just talk. Papers, recordings, their actual plans. Something that can't be dismissed as the ramblings of a senile old woman or an over-emotional mother. But they hide everything, I said, feeling lost. They don't hide it as well as they think, she replied. They have one massive flaw. They trust you completely. Kamisi thinks his mother is simple and naive. He's not afraid to leave you alone in this house. To him, you're the perfect witness, not a threat. We are going to use that. She gave a small smile, one that finally showed some strength and fire. While they're away, you can look through the files, the drawers, their desks. I'll tell you where to look. And if they find out you're awake? Thandiwe's eyes flashed. Then Adero. We'll give them a performance they'll never forget. The next 2 days passed like a blur. Thandiwe and I worked like detectives. Instead of a uniform, I wore my house sweater. Instead of a badge, I had my smartphone. We had to work around the schedule. Nurse Nia came at 9 and 6, and during those times, Thandiwe would transform back into a vegetable, closing her eyes and lying perfectly still. I played the role of the devoted relative, sitting nearby and asking concerned questions. Friday morning at 9, Naya came in quietly, washed her hands, and began checking vitals. She's breathing steadily today, Nia said, looking at the monitor. How was the night? Peaceful, I lied, my stomach twisting. No sounds, no movement, just steady. Naya nodded and made a note. You're doing a great job, Adero. This isn't easy. I just gave a tight smile. If only she knew what I was actually doing. As soon as the door closed, we went back to whispering. Adero, listen carefully, Thandiwe said. Start with Kamisi's office, the top drawer of his desk. There's a tax folder on the right, and behind it is what we need. His office was as cold as the rest of the house. I found the folder. Behind the tax documents was a hidden compartment with a slim file. Inside were the power of attorney forms, bank transfer requests, and estate documents. All had her name, all had her signature. I felt a weight in my chest as I looked at them. I brought them to her. Do you have any of your real signatures anywhere? I asked. In the jewelry box in my old dresser, she said. Old cards, letters. I found a Christmas card from 3 years ago. The handwriting was neat and confident. I laid it next to the documents. Even to my untrained eye, it was obvious. The letters were similar, but the hand was different. It looked practiced, too perfect in some places and shaky in others. "They practiced," Thandiwe whispered. "I once caught Yejide with a stack of papers where my signature was written 10 times in a row. I asked her what it was, and she said she was helping me with thank you notes. I believed her then." I took out my phone and photographed everything: the forged documents, the bank forms, the real signature on the card. "What else?" I asked. "In their bedroom closet," she said. "A shoebox on the top shelf. There should be records of the medications." Their bedroom was like a showroom: white linens, perfectly fluffed pillows, expensive perfume on the vanity. I found the shoebox. Inside were receipts, invoices, and printouts from online orders. I brought it back to her room. "Is this it?" I asked, spreading them out on the bed. "Look closely," she said. "It's not just the pharmacy." Some of the receipts were for standard prescriptions, but others were printouts from deep websites for sedatives and respiratory suppressants, ordered under different names. "She's ordering them under aliases," Thandiwe said, "using maiden names or completely made-up ones." I checked the delivery addresses. They were to P.O. boxes or vacant houses. "How much has she spent on this?" I muttered. We calculated the receipts. Over $5,000 in the last 4 months alone, all paid for with Thandiwe's money. I photographed every single one. But the scariest thing I found wasn't in a box. In their bedroom, tucked behind some books on a shelf, was a thin black notebook. It wasn't hidden deep, just enough to not be obvious to a casual visitor. I brought it to her. "Does she keep a diary?" "More like a clinical log," she replied. "Open it." On the first page, in neat handwriting, it said, "Observation log, subject TO, goal, medication control." I flipped through and read a random entry, October 15th, increased morning dose to 4 milliliters. Subject remained unconscious for 19 hours, breathing stable, pulse 58. Need to adjust so vitals don't raise suspicion with the nurse. The word subject hit me like a slap. "I'm not a person to her," Thandiwe said softly. "Just a subject." I flipped the page. October 22nd. Subject showed signs of arousal after 16 hours. Faint vocalizations during repositioning. Immediately administered supplemental dose. Note: increase standard dose to prevent consciousness breakthroughs. My hands went cold. "She's experimenting on you," I whispered. "Read more," Thandiwe said. October 28th. Discuss timeline with Kay. Agreed to start final phase after Chicago trip. Will document decline starting November 1st. Plan for 10 to 12 days until full respiratory failure. Kay mentioned the December cruise, suggested upgrading to the suite with the funds. My eyes burned with rage. "They're writing down their murder plans like a grocery list," I rasped. The last entry was from November 2nd. November 2nd. A is the perfect witness for the final days. Her testimony about a peaceful passing will be key for the insurance. Kay says his mother is easily led. She's always been useful. A won't suspect a thing. I slammed the book shut. "To them, we aren't even people," I said. "You're a subject and I'm just a letter A." "Because it's easier to not feel guilty that way," Thandiwe replied. "Did you get it all? Every page?" I nodded. "I got it." "Then put it all back," she said. "Exactly as it was, down to the millimeter. They can't suspect a thing." We spent the rest of Friday returning everything to its place. Every time I closed a drawer, it felt like the house was watching me. Thandiwe kept reminding me, "Remember, Adero, they are certain you are on their side. You are the last person they would ever suspect." Saturday morning, Nia came again. She checked the vitals and frowned. "That's strange," she whispered. "Her pulse is a bit lower than usual, and her breathing seems heavier." "Maybe it's just the weather?" I asked cautiously. "Maybe," Nia mused, "but I'm going to make a note for Dr. Vance anyway." She looked at me. "You're sure you haven't given her anything outside the scheduled meds?" My mouth went dry. "Just what you have on the chart," I said. "Nothing else." Nia sighed and looked at the monitor again. "Well, let's keep an eye on it. I'll call the doctor and let him know. She patted my shoulder. Hang in there. If anything changes suddenly, call me immediately. As soon as she left, I ran back to Thandiwe. She noticed the pulse and the breathing, I said quickly. She asked if I was giving you anything else. That means Yejide has added something new, Thandiwe said grimly. Look at the IV stand very carefully. Is there something there that wasn't there before? I leaned in. At first it looked normal. The bag, the tube, the valve. But then I saw it. A tiny supplemental reservoir tucked behind the main bag, almost hidden by the plastic casing. There's a small extra chamber here, I said. That's how she's doing it, Thandiwe whispered. It's a slow-release drip of the extra sedative. That's why I can only stay awake for a few minutes at a time today. Should I take it off? No, she shook her head. If Nia sees the vitals change back without an explanation, it'll cause questions we aren't ready for yet. We need to not just survive this, we need to prove it. My stomach was in knots. We had too much to do and too little time. Kamisi texted, I said, checking my phone. Their flight was early. They'll be home Sunday evening. That means we have less than 48 hours, she said. We have to be ready. Ready for what? We have the documents and photos, she said. Now we need them to say it out loud. We need a recording of their plans, something they can't blame on a senile old woman or a confused mother. You want to record them? Yes, she nodded. They love to talk, especially when they think only a silent vegetable and a compliant mother are listening. We just have to give them the chance to relax. Saturday, we barely spoke. We saved our energy. I played the role of the worried relative, cleaning and checking blankets. Thandiwe practiced her coma, keeping her breathing rhythmic for the nurse. By evening, I felt like I was facing an exam that decided my whole life. Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. Kamisi. My heart dropped. Yes, son? I said, trying to sound normal. Mama, change of plans, he said. The flight got moved up. We'll be home in about 3 hours. I've never turned pale so fast. Oh, that's good, I managed. I'm sure you're anxious to see Thandiwe. Yeah, he said. How is she? The same, I replied. Nurse Nia says she's stable, but her breathing is quiet. I heard him sigh on the other end. Mama, I want to prepare you, he said after a pause. The nurse mentioned there might be a decline soon. With these injuries, sometimes people hold on, and then the body just gives up. A rehearsal, I thought. He's rehearsing the script. Oh, God, I said, playing along. What should I do if— Nothing special, he replied calmly. Yejide knows what to do. If there are changes, she'll handle it. Just stay calm. Of course, I said. I'll see you soon. When I hung up, my hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. 3 hours, I told Thandiwe. We have 3 hours. She didn't panic. Her eyes just sparked. That's enough. Go to the basement, behind the water heater. There's a cardboard box. Bring it here. What's in it? Our chance, she said. Go. I went down to the basement. It smelled like damp concrete and dust. Behind the big white water heater, I found the box, covered with old rags. Inside, I found a small digital video camera, a voice recorder, and several tiny devices that looked like bugs from a spy movie. I brought them upstairs. Where did you get all this? You think I've just been lying here taking it? She gave a weak smile. As soon as I realized where this was going, I started preparing. I ordered them online one by one over months to different addresses. I pretended to be out of it while couriers delivered packages. I hid them when Yejide wasn't looking. What are we doing with these? Setting them up, she said. Put the camera where it can see the bed and their faces. Put the recorders where they like to talk. The living room, the kitchen. They love to discuss their plans over tea and before bed. We don't have to provoke them. We just have to let them be themselves. When we finished, my knees were trembling. I heard a car pull into the driveway, doors slamming, voices, the sound of luggage on the pavement. Are you ready? Thandiwe asked. She was pale and exhausted, but her eyes were like steel. I'm ready, I said. She squeezed my hand and then simply closed her eyes. Her face went slack, her breathing became slow and even. Before me lay the vegetable again. The front door opened. "Adero, we're home!" Yejid's voice rang out. I took a breath, steadied myself, and put on the mask of the grateful mother. Kamisi walked in first, followed by Yejide. They smelled like the road and expensive perfume. "How is she?" Kamisi asked, putting on a show of concern. "Very peaceful," I said, standing up. "Nia was here this morning. She said the vitals are steady, though the pulse is a bit low." I saw a flash of satisfaction on Yejide's face before she masked it. "Oh dear," she sighed, walking to the bed. "Sometimes that's a sign the body is getting tired." She stroked Thandiwi's hair. "Poor Mommy. She's been fighting so long." Kamisi stood next to her, looking solemn. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have been moved. "The nurse said to watch her breathing and skin color," I said carefully. "That those could be signs of changes?" Yes, Yejide agreed. "It happens, a sudden drop after a long period of stability. It's a natural process." The word natural sounded disgusting coming from her. "We just have to make her comfortable," Kamisi added. "Make sure she doesn't suffer." "Should I stay a few more days?" I asked timidly, "in case you need help getting back into the swing of things?" "Mama, no, you've done enough," Kamisi started, but Yejide interrupted. "Actually, I think Adero should stay at least tonight," she said firmly. "With the jet lag and getting back into the routine, an extra pair of hands would be great, and it's good for the family to be together at times like this." Kamisi looked surprised. This wasn't their original plan. "But she's tired," he protested. "Family stays together when things get hard." Yejid smiled, a look that made my skin crawl. "I insist." I felt a surge of anxiety. She didn't want me to stay out of kindness. She wanted me there to keep me under control. "Of course I'll stay," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. That evening they ordered takeout, Thai food. We sat at the table, and I watched them like they were strangers. Over dinner, Kamisi opened a bottle of bourbon. "To getting through these days," he said, pouring a glass for himself and a little for Yejide. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and smiled. "Good news?" Yejide asked. "The cruise line confirmed the upgrade," he said, barely containing his delight. "The penthouse suite with the private terrace, just like you wanted." He looked at me and added in a more sober voice, "We're thinking of taking a cruise after the holidays. We need to rest. This has all been so hard on us." "Of course," I forced a smile. "Resting on Thandiwi's dime," I thought, "while you plan to bury her with that same money." Later, we were in the living room. I sat on the edge of the armchair with my tea while they sat on the sofa. Yejide turned to me, her voice soft and intimate. "Adero, I want you to know how much we appreciate what you've done. Not every mother-in-law would come and sit with her daughter-in-law's mother." "You've always been reliable, Mama," Kamisi added. "Even when I was a kid, you were the one who held things together." I remembered how I held things together by making excuses for his lies. It made me sick to see him use that now. "I just wanted to help," I said quietly. "And you have," Yejide continued. She paused and put a hand to her chest. "Especially now, when we have to be ready for any outcome." "What do the doctors say?" I asked, playing dumb. "How serious is it?" "With injuries like hers," Kamisi said, "the body eventually gives up. Heart, lungs, it's a chain reaction. We have to be ready for it to end in the next few days." Yejide nodded, her eyes shining. "It's scary, but in a way it's a relief. She won't have to suffer anymore." "And how can I help?" I asked. "Just be here," Kamisi said. "Your presence is a huge help. And," he looked at me significantly, "when it's over, it'll be good to have someone who saw how hard we fought until the end, someone who saw that we did everything we could." There it was. They needed my voice to validate their play. "Of course," I nodded. "I'll tell it exactly as it happened." Yejide smiled. "See, Kamisi? I told you your mother was someone we could always count on." At 10 that night, Yejide stood up. "Time for Mama's evening meds," she said. "Adero, come with me. I'll show you how to do it in case you ever need to." In Thandiwee's room, the lamp was dimmed. "Look here," Yejide said in her medical voice, lining up the vials. "This is for pain, this is for seizures, and this helps her sleep peacefully." I watched her fill the syringe. I knew she was drawing more than what was on the label. She was narrating every move like a tour guide. "How long does it take for her to fall asleep?" I asked. "About 15 minutes," she replied. "Then she's out until morning. It's very convenient. She doesn't suffer." She injected the cocktail into the IV port, tossed the syringe into the sharps container, and tucked the blanket in. "Sleep tight, Mommy," she whispered, stroking Thandiwee's hand. I knew that at that moment, Thandiwee was fighting with everything she had to stay conscious. We had agreed that she would endure this one last injection. We needed one more day to finalize the trap. "Well," Yejide said, turning to me, "now we can rest too." We went back to the living room. Kamisi poured another small drink. "I'm tired," Yejide yawned. "I'm going to turn in early." "Adero, your room is all set up," she said. "Thank you," I nodded. "I'm heading up too." But Kamisi suddenly put his glass down a bit too hard. "Yejide, wait. I think we need to discuss something first." His tone was different now, not filial, not tired, but cold and businesslike. Yejide stopped and came back into the room. They suddenly stopped being a grieving couple and became business partners at a negotiation. Kamisi walked to the window and yanked the curtains shut. He turned to me, leaning against the sill with his arms crossed. "Mama," he said, looking straight at me, "we need to make sure you understand the situation clearly." "What situation?" I asked, my voice barely working. Yejide stood slightly behind him, her face stripped of any softness. "The situation with my mother's condition," Kamisi continued, "and your role in what's going to happen over the next few days." I felt a chill run down my spine. "I don't understand," I whispered. He smirked. "Don't play dumb, Mama. It never suited you." Yejide stepped closer, tilting her head like a cat watching a mouse. "Adero," she said, in a voice that was sweet but icy, "Thandiwee is going to die this week, and you are going to help us make sure that nobody asks any unnecessary questions." The words hit me like a belt. Even though I knew it was coming, hearing it out loud like that was different. "What are you saying?" I whispered. "How can you even say that?" "Very easily," Kamisi interrupted, "because it's already decided." He took a step toward me and sat opposite, leaning his elbows on his knees. "In the coming days, Thandiwee's condition will start to worsen. She'll have trouble breathing, her heart will fail. You're going to see it all. And then," he added, "you're going to tell everyone how we fought for her, how we called the ambulance, how we didn't sleep at night doing everything we could." "And if I don't?" I asked. Yejide's expression turned predatory. "Then, Adero," she said softly, "you become a problem that has to be solved." Kamisi looked down, as if he were sad to say it, but his voice was unwavering. "You have to understand, Mama. You're 64. You live alone. Your health isn't what it was at 20. He gestured with his hands. "The roads get icy, houses have stairs, bathrooms are slippery. Things happen to people your age." I felt cold all over. The meaning was as clear as if he had said it directly. "You wouldn't do that," I breathed. "You're not capable of it." "I'd really rather not," he replied. He put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing it slightly as if to comfort me. "But sometimes life puts us in an uncomfortable position." Yejide smiled. "So you have a choice, Adero. Are you with us or against us? Family or an obstacle?" I realized that if I didn't pull myself together, my legs would give out. "I need time," I whispered. I can't just decide right now." "Of course," Kamisi said generously, letting go of my shoulder. "Think about it. Until tomorrow morning. Just keep in mind, we start moving in the morning. It's important to know you're on our side." I got up and walked mechanically to my room. I closed the door and leaned my back against it. My head was buzzing. They had just given me an ultimatum. Either I cover for a murder or I'll be the next one removed. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking so much I couldn't even unbutton my sweater. In the living room, I could hear their muffled voices. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. It wasn't a family chat. It was a strategy session. I probably should have broken down and cried right then, but instead, I remembered Thandiwee's voice. "They're too confident, Adaro. They love to talk. We just need them to talk long enough." I took a deep breath. They didn't even suspect that every word of their confession had been caught by the tiny devices hidden in the sofa cushions. Their threats to me and their admission that she would die this week were no longer just scary words. They were evidence. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house felt like footsteps in the hallway. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic beep of Thandiwee's monitor. But morning came anyway, calm and gray. At 6 in the morning, I heard light footsteps. Yejide was going to check on the patient, humming to herself. I lay there, not breathing, imagining her looking at the IV drip. At 7, there was a knock on my door. "Mama, are you awake?" Kamisi. I forced myself to get up, acting like I had just woken up. He was holding a mug of coffee with a look of sympathy on his face. "I brought you coffee," he said softly. "I know last night was heavy." I took the mug. My hands were still a bit shaky, but I tried to hide it. "Thank you," I said. "I needed to think it through." He looked me in the eye. "Have you thought about it?" I held my breath for a second and then said, "Yes, Kamisi, I understand what you expect from me." He visibly relaxed. "I knew you'd understand," he said almost affectionately. "Family has to stick together, especially at times like this. Especially when the family is planning a murder," I thought. But I didn't say it. "Yejide will start documenting the changes today," he continued. "She might need you to confirm that you're seeing the same thing she is." "I understand," I nodded. "I'll be there." "You're doing the right thing, Mama," he said, patting my shoulder. "It's better for everyone." He left, and I stood there for a second, holding the hot mug. It was so strange to hear that phrase from the man who had basically threatened to kill me hours earlier. When I went into Thandiwee's room, Yejide was already there, scribbling on a notepad, acting like she was filling out important medical logs. She looked worried. "How is she?" I asked. "I'm concerned," Yejide sighed. "Her breathing is shallow, see? Her chest is rising unevenly, and her color was better yesterday." I looked at Thandiwee. She was still, eyes closed, but there was indeed a slight rasp in her breath. The cocktail from last night was doing its job. "Should we call Nia?" I asked on purpose. "I already called," Yejide said. "I asked her to come early and to contact Dr. Vance. We need to document everything." "How can I help?" "Just sit with her," she said. "If her breathing gets worse or her lips turn blue, call me immediately. I'm going to prepare her morning meds." She left. I sat down and took Thandiwee's hand, acting as if I were comforting her. I waited for our signal. A few seconds later, I felt a faint, almost imperceptible squeeze. She was conscious. "I'm here," I whispered without moving my lips. "They think I'm with them." Another faint squeeze. Then began the horrific rehearsal of death. All day, Yejide played the perfect caregiver. She walked around the bed with her notebook, checking the pulse, watching the breathing. Every so often she'd lean in and say seriously, "I don't like her breath sounds. It sounds like fluid in the lungs." Then she'd sit with her phone and call the clinic, and Dr. Vance making sure I could hear. "Hello? Yes, this is Thandiwee Okiki's daughter. Yes, I think she's declining. Her breathing is labored. Her pulse is erratic. Yes, I know it's a common complication." I'm documenting everything. Every call was a perfectly rehearsed scene. The right words, the right tone. But now I could hear the lie in everything. Kamisi was just as good. He'd come in, sigh at the bedside, and then go into the living room to call relatives. "We're doing everything we can," he'd say. "The doctors warned us this could happen. We just have to be prepared." Sometimes he'd come back to me and say heavily, "Mama, we need to get ready. Yajid thinks it could happen in the next 24 to 48 hours. "So soon?" I asked, playing my part. "With these injuries, yes," he'd sigh. "But at least she won't suffer long." Nia arrived around 2 in the afternoon. She checked the pulse and oxygen. "The oxygen is lower," she said quietly. "And the pulse is irregular." "Is that bad?" I asked. "It means the body is starting to tire," she replied gently. "With her diagnosis, it's unfortunately expected." Yejide immediately jumped in. "I'm so worried. Is this it? The decline you mentioned?" "Let's not jump to conclusions," Naya said cautiously. "But I'll talk to Dr. Vance. We might need to adjust the comfort care. Maybe stronger pain management?" "I don't want her to suffer," Yejide said, her voice cracking perfectly. "I'll check with the doctor," Nia said. She looked at Thandiwe one last time and then at me. "Adero, if anything changes suddenly, even at night, call me." As soon as Nia left, Yejide exhaled with relief. "Did you see that?" she whispered to me in the kitchen. "Now it'll be in the medical record. Oxygen drop, irregular pulse, decline. It's perfect." "Perfect?" I asked cautiously. "It's honest," she corrected herself. "It's the objective picture of the disease, so nobody can say we missed anything. When it's over, there will be a perfect medical history. Stability, then gradual decline, then a natural end. No questions asked." I looked at her and thought about how this woman, who could say such things so calmly, was once considered a good match for my son. That evening, they decided to have a family dinner. Kamisi opened a bottle of wine. Yejide set the table with heated-up food, pretending to eat while mostly just moving her fork around. "Let's toast," Kamisi said, raising his glass. "To family," Yejide echoed, looking at him with eyes that seemed to burn with a strange light. "To family," I said, raising my juice. The word family felt like it was coming from a funhouse mirror. At the table, they didn't even hide their plans anymore. They talked about the cruise, the room they'd have, how they'd finally get a real break. "We're even thinking of moving," Kamisi said. "Maybe to Miami? New climate, new people, a fresh start." "And me?" I asked, acting naive. "Where do I fit into this new life?" They exchanged a look. "We talked about this," Yejide said sweetly. "You can visit whenever you want, maybe even move down later. It's better for family to stay close." I realized they wanted to keep me within arm's reach, to control me. "We'll see," I said. At 9 o'clock, Yejide stood up. "Time for the evening meds," she said. "Tonight might be the last night." My heart stopped. "What do you mean, the last?" "I'm increasing the dose of the relaxants," she explained calmly. "If her body is already on the edge, this will help her let go." "Are you sure that's the right move?" Kamisi asked, just for show. "We're following the protocol for comfort care," she replied confidently. "She's struggling. There's no point in dragging it out." The three of us went into Thandiwe's room. The lamp was soft. The machines were beeping quietly. The air smelled like medicine and something sweet and artificial. Yejide pulled out vial after vial, drawing the liquid into the syringe. "This is for pain. This is for seizures. This will help her pass peacefully." I looked at her hands and thought about how many times she had done this to people who couldn't speak up for themselves. She checked the IV, adjusted the extra reservoir, and took a breath. "Maybe this is the final night," she said. "Let's hope it's peaceful." Kamisi stood at the foot of the bed, like a man who had made a difficult but noble choice. I had one thought in my head. If we don't do this now, there won't be a second chance. Yejide moved the syringe toward the IV port. At that moment, I stepped closer to the bed. "Wait," I said. Can I say goodbye first?" My voice cracked, but it worked perfectly as an emotional outburst. "Of course," Kamisi nodded. "It might be the last chance." Yejide stepped back, holding the syringe, and nodded. I leaned over Thandiwe, shielding her face from their view. I pretended to whisper final words. I'm sorry it came to this. Thank you for everything. But what I actually whispered was, now. And in that instant, Thandiwe's eyes snapped open. Yejide jumped back with a scream that rang in my ears. She stumbled, and the syringe slipped from her fingers, clattering on the floor and spraying the remaining liquid. Kamisi backed into the wall, turning as white as a sheet, as if he'd seen a ghost. Thandiwe took a steady breath, straightened up, and sat up in bed. Her movements weren't fast, but they were deliberate. "Hello, Yejide," she said, in an even voice. "Surprised to see me awake?" The room went so quiet you could hear the clock ticking in the hall. This is impossible," Yejide stammered. "You've been out for 6 months. You have brain damage. You can't be—" "I can't be what?" Thandiwe interrupted. "Thinking, remembering, planning?" She tilted her head. "I remember every injection, every forged signature, every dollar you stole from me." Kamisi finally found his voice. "She's having an episode," he said quickly, looking between me and Yejide. "It's some kind of psychosis, post-traumatic stress. She doesn't know what she's saying, right?" Thandiwe reached for the bedside table where the small recorder was hidden and picked it up. "Then maybe you can explain this?" She hit the play button, and Kamisi's voice filled the room, clear, calm, and utterly cold. "Mama, Thandiwe is going to die this week, and you're going to help us make sure nobody asks unnecessary questions." Kamisi's face turned gray. Yejide sank into the chair, her lips turning white. The recording continued. "In the coming days, Thandiwe's condition will worsen. She'll have trouble breathing, her heart will fail. You're going to see it all, and then you're going to tell everyone how we fought for her." Then Yejide's voice. "And Adero, you have a choice. Are you with us, or are you a problem that has to be solved?" I felt everything inside me snap, even though I had heard it before. Thandiwe turned off the recording and looked at them. "I've been recording you for months," she said. "Every whisper, every business meeting over my bed, every joke about the cruise and my convenient death before Christmas." She smiled thinly. "Did you really think I was just going to lie here and wait for you to finish me off?" Kamisi lunged toward the bed. "Give me that," he hissed. "You don't even know what you're doing." Thandiwe held up her hand, stopping him. "I wouldn't do that," she said calmly. "This recorder is just a copy. All the recordings are already with the district attorney and the Major Crimes Division. This house has been under surveillance since yesterday." She looked toward the window. "I think you're about to hear them yourselves." As if on cue, the sound of car doors slamming and heavy footsteps on the gravel erupted from outside. A second later, a loud banging hit the front door, followed by a shout, "Police! Open up!" Yejide jumped up. "You called them?" she hissed. "You set this up." "I didn't set anything up," Thandiwe said mildly. "I just gave you enough time to confess to everything yourselves." The front door burst open. The house shook. Heavy footsteps flooded the hallway. "Police! Everyone stay where you are!" 3 officers burst into the room. 2 were in tactical gear. 1 was in a suit holding a folder. The one in the lead saw the syringe on the floor and me standing by the bed and raised his hand. "Nobody move! This is a mistake," Yejide yelled, jumping up. "I'm a nurse! I'm taking care of my mother! They've got it all wrong!" "Is that so?" The man in the suit replied calmly. "Yejide Olatunji? Kamisi Olatunji?" "Yes," Kamisi croaked. "You are under arrest for suspicion of wire fraud, forgery, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit murder," the detective said clearly. "Your rights will be read at the station, but right now I need to see your hands." Kamisi tried to smile. "Wait, let's talk about this. This is a huge misunderstanding. My wife is caring for her mother, and He glanced at me. "My mother is elderly. She's confused." "We understood everything perfectly," Thandiwe cut in. Her voice was tired. "You have the recordings, Detective?" "We do," he nodded. "From the recorder and the cameras. We've heard enough." An officer began cuffing Kamisi. He flinched, trying to say something, then clamped his jaw shut. The second officer approached Yejide. "Hands behind your back, please," he said. "You don't understand," she gasped. "This is my mother. She's sick. She's brain damaged. Everything she says is a delusion." "The only delusion here is your notebook," the detective retorted. "And we heard your phone calls, too." Yejide went silent, her lips trembling. Kamisi turned to me, already cuffed, and looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. "Mama," he said hollowly. "How could you? I'm your son." I looked at him and realized I was looking at someone who shared my blood, but there was nothing of me left in him. "My son," I said softly, "died a long time ago." I swallowed hard. "All that's left is a man who is willing to kill for a cruise and a new car?" He looked away. Yejide suddenly screamed, "This is all your fault!" She glared at us with pure venom. "You two old hags ruined everything. You would have had nothing without us. You're ungrateful." "Careful now," the officer reminded her. "Everything you say is being recorded." They led her out first. She was still screaming, but the words faded into the distance. Then they led Kamisi. He looked back one last time at the door, but I didn't move. I had nothing left to say to him. When the door closed and the footsteps faded, the house fell into a strange silence. Only a few officers remained, talking quietly in the hall. One was collecting the syringe and papers in an evidence bag. I felt my legs give out and sank into the chair. My hands were shaking, my heart was racing, but deep inside, a tension I'd held for days finally began to uncoil. "Well," Thandiwe said quietly, leaning back against the pillows. "The first act of their play is over." The detective turned to us. "Adero Olatunji? Thandiwe Okiki? We'll need to take you to the station to formalize your statements. Not today, but tomorrow once you've had some rest. We'll have a car pick you up." "We'll be there," I said. "We'll tell everything." He nodded. "Our team will finish the search tonight. You two try to get some sleep." He left, closing the door gently. After a while, the rest of the officers left. The front door clicked. The house was finally quiet, and ours. "Let's go to the kitchen," Thandiwe said. "Let's sit like human beings. I've almost forgotten what it's like to sit at a table." I helped her up. She leaned on my arm. Her legs were weak, but her eyes were so fierce I knew she'd make it, even if she had to crawl. We sat at the table. I put the kettle on. A simple cup of tea in a quiet kitchen felt like the greatest luxury in the world. "How long were you planning this?" I asked once the kettle started to whistle. "Practically from the moment I realized they weren't trying to heal me, but to write me off," she said. "At first I thought about trying to move to a different facility quietly, but I realized they'd never let me go until they'd squeezed every penny out of me." She took a sip of tea, closing her eyes as if tasting life itself. "And then?" "I have an old friend who's a lawyer, from my working days. I asked a nurse at the hospital to let me use her phone. Back at the very beginning when I first woke up, I told her I wanted to update my will. I looked at her in surprise. He came. I asked him to listen. At first, he thought it was just trauma talk, but he went to some contacts in the financial crimes unit. Turns out they were already looking into Kamisi. His consulting projects were actually money laundering schemes and shell companies. I was just a convenient way for them to cover their debts. She exhaled. The detectives told me, without recordings or an outside witness, this could take years and might fall apart in court. We need a live confession. And that's when I started recording. "And me?" I said softly. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because as long as you were living on your own, you were relatively safe," she said. "They just used you as a prop over the phone, but as soon as they decided to move to the final phase, they needed a witness in the house. The detective said, 'When they call her, that's when the trap closes. We'll need someone who can see the games and help gather the physical documents. Only she can do it.'" The tea turned bitter in my mouth. "So, they brought me here to cover for them. And you, she nodded, came here to close the prison door behind them." I sat there, gripping my mug, realizing I'd been used by both sides. one for money and the other to stop a murder. I suppose the choice was an easy one in the end. The next day, a car came for us, a plain black SUV. The detective was there, calm and professional. "You'll go together," he said. "The team at the precinct will help you through it." The drive felt endless. I looked out at the Atlanta skyline, the parks, the people going about their business with their grocery bags, and I thought about how everyone has their own life and their own small troubles. None of them had any idea that somewhere in the city, a case was being built where a son tried to use his own mother as an alibi for murder. At the station, they separated us. They found a cot for Thandiwe in a quiet room. I was sat down with a young female detective with a notepad and an exhausted look. "Let's start from the beginning, Adero," she said, "from the moment your son called you and asked you to come to the house." I talked for a long time. My voice cracked, then grew strong. I had to take breaks for water. She barely interrupted, only asking for clarifications. "Where was Yejidi then?" "Who said that specific phrase? Did this happen before or after the nurse arrived?" The more I talked, the clearer the picture became, and the clearer it became, the worse I felt, because I was hearing not just their crimes, but my own blindness. Eventually, they led me to the hall and brought a doctor in to check on Thandiwe. I sat on the bench, staring at the door, thinking only one thing: please let her be strong enough. Please don't let them say she's just a confused old lady. The detective came out to me after a while. "That's enough for today," he said. "We'll have the formal statement ready for signature soon." "And them?" I asked. "Kamisi and Yejid?" He hesitated. "They're giving their statements. Denying everything, of course." That was expected. "What happens next?" I whispered. "Forensics, audits, the trial," he said. "We've already flagged their accounts and the drug orders. Believe me, there's plenty of work to do." "So it won't be over quickly?" "Cases like this never are," he said. "But we have what they don't: recordings, documents, and living witnesses." He paused, and one mother they very much underestimated. For the first time in days, I managed a tiny smile. The months that followed were heavy. Thandiwe and I lived under a microscope. Constant calls, depositions, signatures, medical exams. The detective called often. "We need one more detail about that night. Look at this document. Have you seen it?" I learned to say the most horrific things, calmly and professionally. "Yes." The syringe was in her hand. "Yes." Kamisi said Thandiwe would die this week. "Yes." I took the threat against my life as real. During that time, Thandiwe and I became as close as if we had known each other forever. I visited her almost every day, first at the rehab center, then later at her cozy townhome in Savannah where she moved back. Sometimes we just sat in her kitchen drinking tea in silence. Other times she'd tell me about her life before the accident, about her work, and how easy it was for her to be stripped of her dignity and labeled demented on a piece of paper. "Paper doesn't care," she sighed. "But thank God the law finally did." The news started picking up the story. Son and daughter-in-law charged in plot to kill, relative for inheritance. Couple suspected of medical fraud and forgery. They didn't always use the names, but we knew. Sometimes the articles mentioned a mother who served as a key witness. I'd read them and feel both stronger and more detached from my own past. The investigation uncovered that the forged power of attorney scheme wasn't their first. There were other elderly people Yejid had assisted in nursing homes until distant relatives or honest doctors intervened. They couldn't prove everything, but the pattern was undeniable. The day of the first hearing, I woke up at 5 a.m. My sleep was in pieces. I dressed simply, a dark dress, a cardigan, comfortable shoes, no jewelry, nothing flashy. I just wanted to be a person telling the truth. Thandiwe and I sat on the bench in the courthouse hallway. White walls, hard benches, people with folders, lawyers with briefcases. "Scared?" she asked softly. "Terrified," I admitted. "You?" "I've already done my grieving," she said. "Now I just have to finish the job." She put her hand on my knee, comforting me instead of the other way around. That's when they led Kamisi and Yajid around the corner. They were dressed neatly, looking respectable and groomed. If it weren't for the cuffs and the guards, you'd think they were just a normal couple there for a civil hearing. Kamisi caught my eye. No anger, no regret, just emptiness. Yejide looked away, her lips pressed thin. They were sat a few yards from us, separated by guards. I felt everything inside me tighten. These were the same people who sat in that living room discussing a cruise on stolen money, whispering over a hospital bed about how convenient it would be for her to die before the holidays, and now they had to hear it all out loud in a court of law. "The court is now in session," the bailiff announced. "All rise." Thandiwe and I stood up. I was shaking, my hands were ice cold, but inside there was a strange sense of peace. There was nowhere left to hide. "Witness Adero Olatunji, please step forward," the clerk said. I stood up, walked to the stand, and took the oath. The judge's voice was even and tired. He'd probably heard 100 stories like this, but this was my only one. "Tell us," the judge said, "from the moment your son asked you to come to his home." And I began, calmly, step by step. How Kamisi called, how he asked me to stay with a sick woman, how I was taken to the room where Thandiwe lay under machines, how they left, and how she opened her eyes and said, "Thank God it's you." I told them how she explained the drugging, how we found the forged signatures, how I read the entries from Yejide's black notebook out loud. I read the part where it said, "Increasing the dose. Subject remained unconscious for 19 hours. Discussed timeline with K. I saw Kamisi sitting there with his head down. Yejide stared at me without blinking, her mouth a thin line. She whispered to her lawyer every so often, but mostly she just burned me with her eyes. I described the evening they returned. I told the court about their talk on the sofa, the cruise to heal their hearts, and the new life they planned in Miami. And then I told them how they sat me down and explained that Thandiwe would die this week and that I would be the witness who said it was natural. When I repeated the threat that accidents happen to people my age, a murmur went through the room. The judge looked up. "Order in the court." I told them about the hidden camera, the recorders, and how we waited for them to condemn themselves, and how, at the very moment she was about to give the final injection, Thandiwe opened her eyes and hit record. "The recordings confirm it all," I said firmly. "What they said to me, what they said to each other, it wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a plan." Kamisi's lawyer tried to make me out to be either hysterical or a naive old woman. "Are you sure you understood your son's words correctly?" he asked. "Isn't it possible you emotionally misinterpreted a difficult conversation about end-of-life care as a threat?" "I'm certain," I replied, "because I was terrified, and because when the police played back the tapes, the words were exactly the same as I heard them that night." "Do you have a history of resentment toward your son?" he continued. "A desire to see him fail?" "I have many regrets," I said honestly, "but I have no desire to invent lies. What he did is enough." They tried their best, but the facts were hard to fight. The tapes had Yejide discussing dosages, the ideal medical picture, and me as the perfect witness. Thandiwe testified next. She was allowed to give her statement from her seat. She spoke quietly, but clearly. She remembered the moment she realized the sedatives were being increased. She remembered trying to tell the doctor she was okay, only for Yejide to insist she was confused. She described how she was moved home not for her comfort, but for theirs. When she described Yejide leaning into her ear to whisper that nobody would notice when she was gone, I caught myself clenching my fists so hard my nails drew blood. The defense tried to use her brain injury against her. "You had a severe traumatic brain injury," the lawyer pressed. "You admit you were unconscious for periods of time. Isn't it possible you're confusing events or attributing things to my clients that weren't said?" Thandiwe looked at him calmly. "If it were just my word, you might have a point," she said. "But you have the tapes, the logbook, the bank records, and the nurse's testimony. You can believe what you want about my trauma, but I have to live with the truth, and so do they." The judge told him to move on. The trial lasted for weeks. Experts on handwriting, medication, and finance testified. A specialist explained how the combination of drugs Yejide administered would indeed suppress the respiratory system while making it look like a natural complication. Nurse Nia testified, crying softly, admitted she noticed the high sedation, but trusted the devoted daughter. Kamisi and Yejide denied everything. Kamisi claimed his words were taken out of context and that he was just preparing his mother for the inevitable. Yejide insisted she was a dedicated caregiver using online resources to manage her mother's pain, and that the notebook was just a clinical tool and subject was just professional shorthand. But the recordings told a different story. The voices on the tape weren't filled with grief. They were filled with greed and cynicism. The sentencing took place on a separate day. By then, I had learned to hold myself together. But when the judge began to read, "Guilty, guilty," my heart still pounded. Kamisi was sentenced to 25 years. Yejide got the same. Between the fraud, the forgery, the larceny, and the attempted murder, the counts piled up. Someone in the gallery let out a loud exhale, but I felt nothing, just a vast, hollow tiredness. The judge asked if we had anything to say. Thandiwe stood up, leaning on her cane. "I am only glad of one thing," she said, "that you won't be able to hurt anyone else. Not people my age, not any other parents, and not any children of your own, if you'd ever had them." Yejide turned away. There was no remorse on her face, only bitterness. Then it was my turn. I walked to the microphone. The room was silent. "I want to say I'm glad justice was served," I began, "but honestly, I just feel like I finally finished something that should have been stopped a long time ago." I looked at Kamisi, not the convict, but the little boy I used to take to preschool, the boy who used to sell forged notes in high school. I spent years closing my eyes to his lies, I continued, hoping he'd grow out of it, hoping he'd meet the right woman. Instead, he met someone just like himself. I swallowed. I'm not happy that my child is going to prison. But he chose this. And if I had to go back, I'd still go to the police and I'd still testify. Because I'd rather have one son in a cell than dozens of innocent parents in the ground. I sat back down. The bailiff announced the end of the session. The guards led them away. Neither of them looked back. Then began the after. It wasn't like a movie, no fireworks or big hugs. Just the mundane reality of life where you don't have to go to depositions or listen to tapes that make your blood run cold. The detective called to say they'd recovered most of Thandiwe's money. "It'll be enough to live comfortably for the rest of your days," he told her. My relationship with my son ended right there. A few letters came from the jail at first, scrawled by someone else, probably following a template. "You betrayed us. We were set up. You'll see who was right." I didn't answer. Eventually, they stopped coming. For the first few months, I lived on autopilot. I did the laundry, I went to the store, I watched the news. Sometimes I'd wake up at night thinking I was back in that house, waiting for the door to open and to hear, "Mama, you have a choice." What pulled me out of it was Thandiwe. We started talking every single day. Not out of obligation, but out of a shared need to not be alone in what we'd experienced. We went to her doctor appointments together. We went back to that house together twice to pack up her things and close it out for good. I helped her move into her townhome, unpack the boxes, and throw away the papers she never wanted to see again. Then one day she said, "Adero, we survived this. Now what? Do we just sit by the TV and wait for the years to pass?" "What do you suggest?" I asked. She gave a sly grin. "I've always wanted to see Ireland, those green fields and the cliffs. You mentioned you wanted to travel. Let's go." I was 64. My travel history consisted of one trip to the Gulf Coast and a weekend in D.C. years ago. Would I have gone alone? Never. But here was a woman who, after 6 months in a drug-induced coma and a murder plot, wanted to see the ocean. We got our passports, booked a tour, and laughed about how, at our age, we were trying to learn phrases like, "Where is the bus stop?" in a different accent. 6 months after the sentencing, we were standing on the edge of the cliffs of Moher, wrapped in our raincoats, watching the gray Atlantic crash against the rocks. The wind was trying to blow us over, and our hair was a mess. Tourists were shouting in different languages, but we just stood there and laughed like two schoolgirls who'd just graduated. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be standing here with you," Thandiwe shouted over the wind, "I would have thought they were crazy." "I wouldn't have believed it either," I yelled back. "I was just happy my son finally called me." We took a selfie, a blurry, crooked photo on my phone. My face looked different than it had in years. Tired, yes, with plenty of wrinkles, but alive. There were more trips after that, not as far, just around the south, to different historic cities. There were ordinary days with long lines at the pharmacy and broken kettles and neighbors who played their music too loud. Life didn't become a fairy tale. It just stopped being someone else's property. I never reconciled with Kamisi. Will I ever? I don't know, maybe in years, if he ever decides to stop making excuses and says, "Yes, I did it," but until then, we have nothing to talk about. Sometimes people ask me, "He's your son, how could you go against him?" And I tell them, I didn't go against him. I went for myself and for everyone else he would have hurt. At 64, I finally learned something that should have clicked a long time ago. Being a mother doesn't mean closing your eyes to everything your child does. Sometimes it means stopping them when they refuse to set their own boundaries. Now, I don't have a family in the way I used to imagine it. No grandkids to take to the park. No big holiday dinners at my son's house, but I have a silence that I control. I have people who are truly on my side, and I have the freedom to not lie to myself. You can call it being alone. I call it living a real adult life where you're finally responsible for yourself and not for someone else's crimes. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.